Good afternoon, and welcome again to another edition of Stay at Home and Brew It. I'm Jeff Perot, and the guys are pretty busy today. So between trying to fill all your orders, as well as trying to work on some things, so hopefully we can open up the shop here before too long. So I may be doing this one solo. Stubby said at one point he may actually be joining us. We'll see if he does. He may join us for a little bit. But today what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about how to brew an award-winning IPA. Now, I think one of the things that happens is, we got looks like we got Stubby joining us today. So,
what's up, guys?
So, wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of brewing an award-winning IPA. Now, actually, the IPA kit we have here at the shop is actually an award-winning IPA. It's actually Stubby's IPA. He did very well with it, and the Blue Bonnet Brew Off a few years ago.
Yeah, I think it was a long time ago.
Long time ago? Okay.
But that's back when American IPAs was the biggest category. I think there was 85 entries. So,
holy mackerel.
Yeah, so I mean, you're talking, I felt like that was a pretty good representation of the style.
Okay.
We actually had two different versions. It's almost the exact same kit.
Really?
Yeah, so if you see Stubby's IPA, that's one iteration of it. And then also the Amarillo IPA, they're both very similar, except for Centennial and Amarillo were changed out in them.
Okay.
So I think this one has a Centennial, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe it does.
Yes, Centennial. So, and the reason that both of those exist is because my original recipe actually had the Amarillo in it.
Really? Okay.
And so at the time when we made this kit, Amarillo was short. You couldn't find Amarillo anywhere. I mean, it was going for $5 or $6 an ounce, right?
Oh yeah.
So what we did is we tried it with Centennial, and we actually liked that really well. It was a really nice, just a little bit different. And then we once we were able to get Amarillo back in, so we said, well, we need to make the original kit. So that's Amarillo IPA. So they're both pretty similar.
Okay.
Grain bill's the same, just different hops.
Okay. Now your grain bill itself wasn't hugely complex. Sometimes homebrewers can come in and we want to throw in a lot of different kinds of grain at something.
Yeah, and I think really IPAs, especially like a West Coast IPA, which I think this would be more like a West Coast IPA.
Okay.
Very simple. I think you don't want to muddy it up too much, but you need some caramel in order to kind of offset some of the bitterness.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this uses a half a pound of Crystal 60.
Okay.
And so, if I'm not mistaken, I'm shooting from memory here, but I'm pretty sure it's a half a pound of Crystal 60. Yep, that's correct. So, but yeah, it's real simple. I think homebrewers typically, they really have a bad, I think a lot of times I think homebrewers think, hey, the more I'm going to add to it, the more complex my beer is going to become. So I think a lot of times what homebrewers are really bad about going, hey, I want to put biscuit malt, and I want to put this in it, and I want to put this in it. And what really happens is it just muddies it up. So I would say the more simple a recipe you can get by with, the better off you are. I can assure you, professional brewers are not using 10 different specialty malts.
No.
And that's just not just a general rule. That's just a general rule for home brewing, I think, in general, not necessarily IPAs. But, I have seen some, IPAs use maybe some 40, Crystal 40 or something of that nature. Some people use a little bit of brown malt. I know like Dogfish Head uses some, no, they use amber malt, excuse me.
Oh, okay.
So it gives it a little more toasty character. Rather than just a straight caramel. I think like their Dogfish Head 60 uses maybe like a half a pound. I'll have to check that, but of amber malt. But that's a way that you can experiment a little bit there, I think.
Okay.
And so for me, that's kind of where I kind of look at grain bills basically for a West Coast IPA.
Okay.
Real simple, 40-60, or you can even do a combination of 40-60. if you want to use 40, you're going to get a little bit lighter. I think one of the things that I always kind of try to explain to people is caramel malt in general.
Mm-hmm.
The most common ones are 10, 20, 40, 60, 80, 90, 120. Those are the most common ones you see. Of course, there's stuff all in between there, right? But always look at like a 10, more of a toasty, bready flavor.
Okay.
Whereas you get more into the 40s and 60s, more of a true caramel flavor. And as you get to your into your 90s and 120s, you get more of that raisiny, dark fruit character, which that would be very, I think, inappropriate in that style unless you were using just maybe an ounce or something like that.
Gotcha.
That's typically like English bitters. Usually you use the higher end caramels, and then maybe just use 1 or 2 ounces. So
Okay.
That's commonplace. Like for an English bitter, maybe like a couple ounces at 120. So. And that's one of the things that's really interesting if you think about it. I mean, the IPA and the pale ales and everything, they're very similar to English styles. So that's where they were derived from.
Mm-hmm.
So, your English pale ale is very similar to American pale ale. It's just it's got different ingredients. You could take a recipe and use it pretty much across the board. You can say, hey, I want to sub this for English hops and English grain and maybe a little less alcohol and IBUs.
Okay, we kind of made it a little bit bigger here in America.
Yeah, especially, IPA and maybe an ESB are going to be pretty similar, maybe,
Okay.
but typically American IPA has a little more alcohol, so maybe at 1 or 2%.
Okay,
So-
and definitely American hops. So that'd be
Yeah,
something as
definitely.
you're brewing your IPA, pay attention to what your hop choices are. If you're brewing an English IPA, don't start throwing in the Cascade, Centennial, and Amarillo. It doesn't make sense. You want to stick to your East Kent Golding, your Fuggle.
Right. And so what I did with this particular kit that I won awards with, we've won a lot of awards with this kit, is when I was looking at it from a standpoint, I kind of took a tip from Sierra Nevada.
Okay.
And Sierra Nevada uses a lot of Pearl and Magnum.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this particular beer is bittered with Pearl and Magnum. So, for example, at 60 minutes, it's got Magnum, and then 30 minutes, it's got an ounce of Pearl and an ounce of Centennial. So you get the reason I did that is the German bittering hops typically for me have a little less harsh bitterness. So I think it's a little more clean. So for me, that's why I like to use the Magnum and Pearl, because I think it makes it a little more soft bitterness.
Okay.
Rather than, if you use like a Chinook, I think it's kind of harsh.
Yeah.
Or something like you could get by with like a Tomahawk or CTZ. I think that's a nice hop, but to me, it still has a little more harsh around the edge. And that's why I use like a Magnum.
Okay. And let's see. We had Gene was asking about the ABV on Stubby's IPA was
6.5.
about 6.5%.
Yeah. So, and of course, that all depends on, and I don't know what we're talking about as far as, are we just doing American IPAs or just IPAs in general? IPAs is a pretty big
It is
category.
And I'm kind of talking about the idea of, in general, how you brew an award-winning IPA.
Right.
So far from what you've been talking about, one is keeping the malt bill simple.
Yes.
And not throwing a bunch of extra stuff in there. Now, some you might have to throw in some things like if you want to make a black IPA or a red IPA.
Yeah. For sure.
Some of those you might have to add.
Well,
a
and
little
you
bit
have
for
to,
color.
you have to look at too, because when you start doing that's one of the things that I think is a really tough style to do, especially the black IPA. The reason being is because you don't want that roast to be bitter along with the hot bitterness. So it's tough to balance that.
Yeah.
If I was going to do one today, I would definitely use a small amount of the Irex black wheat, which is like a dehusked wheat. I think it's like a 600 Lovabond. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Make it really dark. That's where you would get your color without getting a ton of roast and ton of bitterness.
Isn't that what we use in our black IPA, the black
I
Mojo?
think that we're changing that. The Black Mojo has black. No, it has
Midnight Wheat?
Midnight Wheat in
Okay.
it. However, we're changed to the Irex or Irex because it's a little less bitter.
Okay.
So, So that's what we're kind of getting. And then you also have to look at, if you're doing a red IPA, you're probably going to have some more caramels in there. So
Okay.
you're going to have to balance that caramel out with more bitterness or hops. You have to
Well,
look at your hops.
the black IPA my buddy Nick and I done pretty well with. We've got, we use the Midnight Wheat, and we had a little bit of caramel stuff in there, but then we also threw in some Caramunic too.
Okay. Yeah.
And that helped because when we'd had black IPAs in the past,
Right.
too oftentimes you got, people are throwing in, these carafas and stuff like that, and it gets too roasty and
Carafa's weird.
Oh yeah.
It gives it a weird flavor.
Even dehusked, it doesn't work.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're right on track there. And basically Caramunic too is basically like high 60s caramel malt. I mean, I think a lot of times people really get hung up on the Caramunic. It's really just a caramel malt. It starts out as Munich, but really it doesn't really add that much different flavor. So I mean, if you could I could bring out 4 different caramel malts, 60 caramel 60s, and you probably wouldn't be able to pick it out of the lineup.
Okay.
But they all have different flavors. Every maltster has a different flavor.
Oh yeah, when if you haven't seen the episode on malt we did recently with Brock, we took you actually through the various caramel 60s, and it's startling to know the difference between Muntons, between Brees, and between Irix.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
It was quite.
So those are all different ways. You have to components you have to look at when you're brewing. Your IPAs. You have to kind of look at all of those different aspects. If you do want a lighter IPA and you don't want that caramel backbone, you really have to be really cautious of your bitterness, because that's the whole reason you add caramel, is to offset your bitterness or balance the beer basically. Because if you don't have that caramel in there, it's going to be harsh and really bitter. The sweetness, bitters, offsets the bitterness.
Yeah, that's why I've never been a huge fan of the Smash IPAs.
Yes.
I mean, I find them interesting.
Yeah,
but
they're informational.
Yeah, they're informational, but
educating.
They're not ones that I would want to tip back a couple.
Yeah, and I think typically is that it doesn't have any complexity, but it is educational in the fact that you get to listen. You got to kind of get an idea of what the hop tastes like, or the grain. I think even if you really wanted a light one, it might even benefit from maybe some some 10 or 20 caramel. It's not going to add a whole lot of color, but it will give you a little bit of balance. A lot of times we use even Irix has like a 5, I think, or a 2, and what that does is that'll add you a little bit of that sweetness without giving you a whole lot of color. So that's a way you can look at that too. So.
Okay, and now in particular also when you're looking at something for brewing for competition is slightly different than brewing for home. When you're brewing for competition, you're looking for ways in which your beer can stand out.
Right.
Like
absolutely.
you've done some judging.
Absolutely. And I've actually entered this kit. It's kind of in the. You can get away with entering this in the pale ale category.
Okay.
Because it's going to be on the high end of what some people think a pale ale should taste like.
Okay.
And then I think and then on the other side of that, this is probably on the lower end of the bitterness or harshness of what you're going to get on the other end of the spectrum on the IPA, right? So I've entered it in both and won with both. So it really depends on your judge, because I think a lot of times when I'm especially IPAs and pale ales, what I would look at is a lot of times that kind of look at it this way. I think you're better off actually brewing towards the either end of the spectrum on your beers, because it kind of stands out from the pack, rather than if you're just kind of in the middle. It doesn't really. They all kind of start to taste the same, and depending on the judge, and they might like, oh man, I really like the way this one's easy drinking, it's great, it's well balanced, or they may go, this one's not bitter enough, and they prefer more bitter, IPAs. So it's a luck of the draw, of course, when you're judging, especially with, I think this category probably is as much as any or maybe more.
Yeah.
Because all people have a preconceived notion of what an IPA is supposed to taste like. Even though And it's not necessarily they're incorrect. That's just what they prefer.
Yeah. And even if you take a look at the BJCP guidelines, style guidelines, you'll see there's a lot of variance given for, and a lot of room given for how these beers are brewed. They'll talk about it's late hopping and strong hop nose is acceptable but not necessary.
Right.
Strong hop flavor is acceptable but not required or necessary. And so there's a lot of leeway. But as he was saying, if you can do things in which you can help your beer to stand out in the lineup when a judge has 10, 12 beers in front of them, that can perhaps help you out a little bit in a competition.
Absolutely.
Of course, it doesn't do anything for you if your recipe already is not very good.
True.
So, start with a recipe that's not so complicated,
right,
with simple base malt, maybe some crystals.
Well, and I think if you look at this, I mean, really, it's a very, very, very simple recipe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it. You got 1 ounce for bittering, 2 ounces at 30, 1 at 30 minutes, 1 at 10 minutes, and 1 ounce for dry hopping.
Okay.
And I think a lot of times people try to pack so many different hops in there and all this hops in there that I think a lot of times it gets muddied up. I mean, and the same thing with specialty malt. A lot of times I drink beers, and what I like to drink is more of a sessionable type beer. It's not overly complex, but it's good, it's clean, it's tasty, it's sessionable, and so I think a lot of times when you put all of this crap in there, you put too many elements, it just becomes muddy.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All of those flavors get muddled.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, really, like this Stubby's IPA recipe, you're getting the main gist of Centennial flavor and dry hop. It's pretty much, that's where you're getting the majority of your flavor and aroma.
Yeah.
From Centennial, and the same thing with the Amarillo kit, you're getting all Amarillo.
Okay.
And so the only other thing that might improve this kit if you wanted to do it, the only thing I might say is maybe throw one in at flame out.
Okay.
Other than what's in here. But.
Okay. See, Casey Kirkpatrick says he's brewed it and it's a great kit, and says it balances out well. Definitely not. It isn't too bitter. It's not an IPA that's over hopped and tastes like grass. That's
well, and that's part of the point too.
Yeah.
Is I think a lot of times and that all has to do with your dry hopping procedure as well, and how long you leave your hops on that particularly.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of times if you put so much, just look at it this way: you're putting a whole lot of organic material in there. I mean, a whole lot of organic material, and so that's one of the reasons that I don't like to leave mine on there a long time, because, and it depends on the variety too, but you can get a lot of that vegetal flavor.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And so if you're ever going to dry hop it, don't leave it on there for very long. Pull it off quick. I wouldn't do that.
So, I mean, about on average, how long would you recommend dry hopping?
I would say 3 to 7 days.
Okay.
Depending on what you're trying to go for. And so many things have changed with dry hopping. Like, this is old school, man. This isn't like biotransformation, dry hopping during fermentation and all of that. I'm not looking for all those fruity characters, like in a New England IPA. In this beer, I'm looking more for the piney, the resinous, the slight citrus flavor, but more of a reserved, not fruity flavor, right?
Yeah.
It's real simple, real easy. This way, people have been kind of pretty much making IPAs for a long time. I mean, even in the UK, but UK's versions, in the UK IPA, it's an oddball thing. I mean, UK IPA can be 3.5%. So, I mean, I think that's what is it? Green King, I think, is 3.5%.
Yeah, it's a good beer though.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really
fantastic
good.
IPA. So I know you got here water. Do you adjust your water for your IPAs? Because I really don't. Here in DFW, we really have great water, so I don't really add a whole lot or change it much. Yeah, so
I always do a little bit of additions. Like if I'm if I'm doing a West
Put a
Coast
little
style,
gypsum in?
yeah,
Gypsum?
to put a little bit of gypsum in,
Okay.
and if I'm trying to do something a little more hazy or something like that, I'll do a little bit of a little
Sulfate.
calcium chloride, something
Yeah.
like that.
Okay.
But also, if you're brewing in particular for competition, or even if you're brewing for an event, you got a party coming up or something like that. Maybe you're planning your
Right.
post-COVID party.
Right.
Try and understand when your beer is at its best. Realize that you could brew Stubby's IPA kit right now, and it probably hits its peak. Probably what 2-3 weeks after primary.
I would say that I kind of like it about a month or two.
Okay.
And the reason I think that, because this is one of the things that you guys may or may not know. So it is a little higher in alcohol. It does have a little bit of alcohol character to it, and so as beers age, and this is with any alcohol, as alcohol ages, it mellows, right?
Mm-hmm.
It gets less and less hot. And then also I think the hops are really upfront and bitter, so I think they start to kind of meld, in between 1 and 3 months for me. That's where I
Okay.
kind of like them. But after 3 months, then the hop character starts to drop out, the bitterness. And then you just have bitterness there. There's no any flavor and
Yeah.
stuff anymore.
So you'll want
And
to.
you have to be careful too, because oxidation are really important with this style.
Okay. So, as he was saying, you'll want to figure out, okay, when that is. And I mean, if at a month it's kind of hitting its prime, you'll want to brew it such that for if it's a competition, you'll want to brew it such that the judges are going to be judging it at that 1 month mark.
Right.
It may mean that you're kegging it and bottling it when it's still too young, but that's okay. It's going to continue to age in the bottle.
Well, and I've always had good luck too with IPAs and competition by bottle conditioning. And the reason being is because when you bottle condition, you don't have any chance. Really, the yeast goes in and scavenges all any kind of dissolved oxygen. And so one of the neat things that you guys may not know is Sierra Nevada bottle conditions all of their beers. So, and the reason they do that is because of shelf life. It helps with the shelf life because the yeast comes in there, it carbonates itself, and it absorbs any oxygen, and so it has a little longer shelf life. So that's something to consider.
Yeah, I'd heard that when I went on their little tour of their place years back.
Well, they've
Which I
got
was
it down to an absolute art, man, because it's
Yeah.
absolutely like a fine, thin, layer. You can't even hardly see it.
Yeah.
But I think, and I would say too, they're using a bottle conditioning yeast, not just their old Chico yeast. It's a yeast. It's like CBC1. So that kind of give you an idea of some options as well, because I think oxidation is a big problem in IPAs. And I think you guys had a show about that recently.
We did, yeah. If you haven't seen the one on oxidation, we're talking about multiple dry hop additions and things like that. Take a look at that show, because especially with IPAs, as he was saying, oxidation is the thing you want to avoid. I mean, and it can get in there real fast, and you get a cardboard taste to your beer, and that is not tasty at all.
Yeah, sure. And that's the biggest problem. You guys, if you're into the New England IPA stuff, that's the problem. There's so much hops in there that they don't last long. I mean, it's a short-lived beer. It has no shelf life. That's why most people that are really doing a good job at it are selling it on site or to go.
Oh yeah.
They're not mass producing it, and it just doesn't. Beer doesn't hold up well, and that's a lot of that reason is oxidation. Most of them, you'll see it. And oxidation, not only does it cause the hops to taste bad or off, but it also can change the color of the beer. So you can see it. You can see it. It might be like, looks like orange juice, and then a couple days later it's kind of darker yellow. And that's the reason why it's oxidizing.
So be very careful on that. Also, when you're choosing your yeast, choose a yeast that's appropriate as well as one that's going to accentuate the hop characters. We'd mentioned before in another episode, go online. A lot of the yeast companies have details on there to where some yeasts, if you ferment them down a little bit cooler, will accentuate certain characteristics that you might want or maybe you don't want. Sometimes you get a little more citrus character out of it when you're fermenting it at a different temperature.
Yeah, and I typically always had great luck with the USO5 or 1056. It's hard to beat.
Yeah, those are great yeasts.
I think I ferment this one around 65 degrees because I want a little more ester profile.
Okay.
Even though USO5 doesn't have a whole lot of esters, but Or you can use like a 1272. I think that's a popular strain as well.
American 2.
American 2, which I believe is Anchor's Liberty.
Oh, really?
If I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what they use for their IPA. But it seems to not attenuate quite as well, so at least a more residual sweetness, whereas the USO5 will attenuate a little better, have a little drier finish. So, but yeah, I think that's important too, though. So, for example, we have this kit. It's a El Dorado Pale Ale kit, right? And so
sent out one of those today.
Yeah, and so it's a really unique kit. It's really interesting. I think it's fantastic. I think it tastes great. It would score crappy in the Pale Ale recipe category, and here's the reason why: it's because those hops are not really appropriate for that particular style. So you get kind of these candy flavors, the cherry flavors, and that's not appropriate in an American Pale Ale category. So you have to really, a lot of times I think people will go, oh, well, when I made that the first time, everybody was like, oh my God, this is amazing, it tastes great. And my buddy was like, well, it's gonna score like shit, in category. And I was like, absolutely. But he said, man, I would drink this every day, But so you have to make sure, don't use all these funky New Zealand hops if you're doing an American IPA or a Pale Ale. Or I wouldn't even get into the crazy Citra and Mosaic and stuff like. You might could get wild with Mosaic, but some of the really weird ones, I think you would have a hard time.
Yeah.
You might use those for your New England hazies.
Yeah, you start throwing like Vic Secret, Azaka, things like that in there. It's kind of tough. So a lot of this, your standard C hops are always good for award-winning IPAs and stuff like that. Yep. I say also with those, pay attention to your hop combinations. Try and find stuff that's gonna jive well together. As he was saying, you don't want something that's gonna have kind of a candy sort of cherry thing going on.
Right. I think you can pretty much, if you're gonna do American IPA, stick with the C hops. Centennial, Cascade, Chinook, Amarillo. Even though it's not a C hop, I think you're kind of in that same category. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's old school hops. I think if you're going to do an old school style recipe, that is for competition.
Correct.
Now, if you want to do that, if you want to make you want to make a West Coast style IPA with a Zaka or
then
whatever, that's fine. Try it out, but don't expect it to score well in competition.
Yeah. So keep in mind, there's a bit of a difference between competition brewing and brewing, just for your own enjoyment. As he was mentioning, the El Dorado Pale Ale, which we have, is a fantastic beer, but it's also one which wouldn't do necessarily great in competition, but it's great to have on tap.
Yeah, and a drink.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things, and I think a lot of times you really got to enjoy brewing for competition, because I think a lot of times, if you're experimental type and you want to do all kinds of different crazy stuff, competition might not be for you, because there's only so many categories you can put this. You have an experimental category, or you have fruit and categories, and then you have spice, herb, and vegetable categories. But you're really limited to 3 or 4 categories when you get really crazy and off the beaten path. So and that's what you kind of got to look at. Is this something you're really going to enjoy? Is it something you're going to do? I find it a lot of fun. I find it really interesting, and always have a great time. But some people don't want to just brew normal style beers.
Yeah. And
that's
so
okay too.
There's no problem with that either, and that's definitely something you can do. So I don't really see any questions or comments.
Okay.
So I think we're good, unless you have anything to follow up.
Nope. Give it a shot. If you guys have any questions, you can always shoot us an email at info@texasbrewinginc.com, or you can give us a call at 682-647-1267.
And thank you again for all of your orders.
Absolutely.
Your support, we appreciate it. We know these times are difficult on everybody, but we appreciate your patience, especially those of y'all who've been using our curbside. We're still, we've had a number of y'all ask about when we're going to be opening, and that's something we're going to wait still before we actually do. I think.
And I think what's important that you guys know is that we've got a huge influx of business, and we're having a hard time keeping up to the fact that we think that our basically our service would hurt us. And the service would be hurt by having people come in where we think we could best serve you guys still curbside and be more efficient and make sure to get in stuff in and out quicker, because we are really overloaded in the back.
We are, which is a good thing, and we
Great
appreciate
thing.
it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We appreciate it. So we appreciate all your support. We appreciate you tuning in. If you have ever any questions or you have show topics that you'd like to suggest, let us know. Give us a call if you need any help. And, y'all stay safe.
Yep.
Stay home.
Send me beer if you want me to taste it. All right, guys. Y'all have a good one.
All right. Y'all have a good